Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Taxpayer Protection Alliance webinar. This one is entitled Overregulation in Nicotine, a Pipeline to Black Markets. It's going to be about how excessive regulation can fuel the growth of illicit markets, often with unintended and damaging consequences. We're going to keep to an hour, and we are going to hope to put in a Q&A so you can ask some questions. Please, when you do ask the questions, don't put them in the chat section. Put them in the Q&A box because I won't see them if they're in the chat part. We'll be looking for the questions in the Q&A. So to start off with, just to set out the problem with nicotine prohibition and illicit trade, a National Library of Medicine survey last year modelled various prohibition scenarios of cigarettes, flavoured cigars, and flavoured e-cigarettes, and found that 24 to 30% of those who smoked, 21 to 41% of people who dual used, and 24 to 30% of those who 35 to 39% of people who used e-cigarettes said they would seek out illicit channels to acquire the prohibited products. Of course, this doesn't only fuel black market activity, but it also contributes to other criminal activity and drives people to suppliers of other illegal substances. And I don't expect they would be too willing to impose age restrictions. We've seen bans of vaping in many countries like Singapore and Brazil. France just banned nicotine pouches. And despite anti-nicotine organisations claiming that prohibition doesn't create black markets, it is an economic reality. So this will become, I expect, a growing topic in the future. So tonight, to talk to us, we have Michael Ellis. Michael is a widely recognised expert on international illicit trade. He's presented extensively on the subject and now acts as an international advisor on illicit trade, raising awareness of influences brought about by organised crime. He's been engaged in global illicit trade enforcement, investigations and capacity building and training efforts since 1996, and is a former Assistant Director of Police Services at Interpol. He was the head of the Interpol Traffic in Illicit Goods and Counterfeit Programme, where he managed and coordinated Interpol's global strategy to fight against illicit trade and countering infringement, and led the police organisation's international efforts in this area. He's currently advisor to Prohibition Does Not Work, which is a group which campaigns for better regulation of harm reduction products. You can find them at prohibitiondoesnotwork.com, on Facebook, and at PDNW Media on X or Twitter. So welcome, Michael. Glad to
Thank
have you
you.
with us.
Hi.
Do you want to just start by telling something of your background, which we've just mentioned there in the bio, and your activities with Prohibition Doesn't Work?
Yeah, so with Prohibition Doesn't Work, I provide expertise and advice on the outcomes of restrictive policies and banning of products. My background is in law enforcement. I'm not a what am I not? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an academic. Um, my life has been in policing as a detective, initially at Scotland Yard, dealing at that time with serious major organised crime, and then eventually moving to Interpol, where I was the head of the Illicit Trade Directorate. So you understand Interpol will have many areas of expertise: human trafficking, drugs, terrorism, cybercrime, corruption in sport, arts and antiques, missing persons, all these sort of areas of expertise. And I headed what was at the time the Illicit Trade Directorate. We had a mixture of, we had our own lawyers, we had our own analysts, we had investigators, operational guys, assisting the 190 Interpol member countries on how to tackle and combat illicit trade. So a very interesting time. And I left there to move into the world I'm in now, which is providing advice and expertise on illicit trade to various organisations. I do some work with the EU Commission. I do some work with brand holders and such like.
And as I said, it's a growing problem, isn't it? We've seen just today. I read something about Canada, where in Quebec they banned flavored vape products, I think, and some like 36% of a survey said that they would go back to cigarettes, um, which is a real problem. Let's talk about the USA first, because the FDA recently, last week, approved some flavored vaping products for the first time. There were just two. It was a blueberry flavor and a mango
Yeah,
flavor. But there was a furious backlash, a huge backlash from vested interest groups to this news. They viewed it as a political decision. Now, it seemed to me that the Food and Drug Administration scientists had signed off on this, but the political part was Dr. Marty Makary, who was the commissioner of the FDA, had decided he didn't want to allow that. We've just found out today that he's resigned. But what's your view of the impact that this will have with the FDA? I mean, what's your view of their decision and how it's going to affect the situation in the United States?
well, I think I think it's widely agreed that restriction doesn't work. I hope that's widely agreed. I hope that everybody understands that restrictive policies will only drive people in a particular direction, and that direction is towards the black market and towards crime and financing crime. So if we see measures like this, which hopefully is an indication of some sort of balanced approach, which is positive, then obviously I assume a good thing, potentially a good thing.
I find it quite interesting that the same people who are screaming about how there are loads of illegal Chinese products in America are the same ones who are also criticizing the FDA for approving some American flavored products, as if these things aren't linked.
Yeah, I in my experience in the past, these types of all these types of studies that you see by governments or all these like look at the EU directives, for example. There's a lot of expertise and a lot of information provided by a mixture of academics, researchers, health experts. But it seems that there's never a voice on the illicit impacts. There's never a voice. There never seems to me there's never a voice on the what's the potential criminal outcomes. So of course it seemed to be only right that you'd have this explosion of reaction from certain parties without really understanding the other side of the story, which is the crime, how this could hopefully provide an alternative to driving people towards the criminals.
In my experience, it seems that the anti-nicotine organisations themselves seem to appoint their own experts, and their own experts seem to have the opinion that banning products doesn't cause a black market. So I think that's where they seem to be coming from. It seems to me.
And yet, if you as hopefully we'll move on, you look at some markets, that's exactly what happens.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, okay, we're both British, so let's tackle the Tobacco and Vapes Act. Was the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, but it's now been passed, signed off by the King. The King's speech is here tomorrow, and he'll announce that this is going forward. It involves this generational age ban, which, for anyone who doesn't know, it means that it will never be legal for anyone born after the 1st of January 2009 to ever buy cigarettes in this country. How do you think that's going to pan out?
I think that's a bit of a fantasy, so time will tell.
Yeah. But it also has restrictions on vape products. There's a new taxation on vape products coming this year now, October, which
Yes.
will more than double many liquids. They're going to introduce vape and heated tobacco-free spaces. They've just done a consultation on that. They're going to have another consultation on restricting flavors, banning advertising, implementing plain packaging, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts on the ramifications in the UK following implementation of this law? Because
Well, I mean,
it's
as you know, those types of measures follow very much what happened to exactly with plain packaging with heated tobacco products. So the banning of advertising, plain packaging, removing advertising, all of those things are following the UK's previous experiences, and I guess that's why that they've gone down that route. Um, will it? Let's talk about the taxation point. Can you tax people out of buying a product that they want to buy? My belief is no, you can't. You can't tax people out of buying it. What you will do is you will incentivize them to go somewhere else. That's what will happen. So I think again, there's this need for a balanced approach, and um, it seems widely understood by governments. So, well, if we raise the tax, we'll reduce the demand. And I think that's a warped, my own experience is that is a warped policy. It's a warped thought. It doesn't work like that because a person a person who wants to buy a product who suddenly thinks, well, this is ridiculously expensive, will source it elsewhere. And unfortunately, there's a thousand different places where they can source illicit vapes. So I see what they're trying to do. And again, time will tell, but you cannot tax your way out of this problem. That's my view.
What makes it, I think, even more complicated in the UK is that they're implementing this tax specifically to stop young people vaping, and they're saying this will stop young people vaping, but it won't affect adults at all. I mean, that seems bizarre to me. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
that doesn't work. It won't work, and young people will find their way around it. There are thousands of corner shops, as you know, in the UK, who are willing to supply this product to young persons without a second thought. It's the same, the same restrictions on alcohol, for example, trying to stop young people from drinking. If that's what they want to do, if that's what a consumer wants to do, adult or young person, they will find a way of doing it. If you provide a reasonable priced, legitimate supply chain, you have a chance they will buy a safe product. If you tax them out of doing that, you will drive them towards giving their hard-earned money to criminals who will reinvest it and use it in other ways. And that's the story all over the world. It's simple as it's very simple.
So put together with the generation age ban, which makes it illegal for anyone born after a certain date to buy cigarettes, and forcing people really to rethink whether they want to vape or not because of the cost. I can only see this increasing or slowing the decline anyway in smoking rates, which is not good for anyone, is it?
Exactly. I
Mm.
agree. I agree.
Okay, let's talk about some other countries. I mean, recently we've had decisions in Argentina and Bangladesh. Both of them recently withdrew bans on their safer nicotine products, which they've had. I think Argentina had a ban for a long time, probably about the same as Brazil since about 2009, I think. Um, I mean, this seems to me very good news, doesn't it? Argentina and Bangladesh are withdrawing their bans and
Again, it
regulating
does.
instead.
But do you know any more about why? What lies behind that? What's the reasoning behind that?
I don't know. I know the Argentina one seemed to me anyway to come out of the blue. It was just something that was announced last week, and Bangladesh, I didn't hear much about that. But do you think this is a reaction to the black market itself? Maybe these countries are finding that there are black markets and they have to do something about it.
Yes, or they're realizing they're losing so much. There's a tax benefit in supplying a legitimate product. There's a taxation possibility, so there's government revenue. If you've banned it and all you're doing is driving the consumers to illegal to spend their money down illegal revenues. There's no taxation benefit for that. So perhaps both countries, or have taken example of, or understood other best practices in other countries, have thought, well, actually, this isn't the way to go. And if that's right, then great, because that's what we want to see. Again, a balanced approach.
Yeah, the other approach obviously is Australia, which I know you work with Tim Andrews, is Australian,
Yeah.
and I know he's exasperated what's happening in his home country. They've, of course, put up the tax massively on cigarette products, and they've banned vaping products entirely, which doesn't even give people an exit strategy. And they're having fire bombings. That they basically lost control of their market, haven't they? There over there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What that does then is creates a void in the supply chain. There's a gap now because there's no legitimate product. That, of course, provides opportunities for organized crime gangs to exploit because they can very easily fill that gap. That then leads to the very vicious gangland fights, gangland wars competing for territories where innocent people obviously can get caught up in all of that. And that's exactly what you're seeing there. And again, you see the same in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I believe the figures are, I think, almost all because vapes are they're banned and only available in pharmacies, and many suppliers have pulled out because of ISO requirements or something. Virtually all of those are illegal, and many people are just buying their cigarettes on the black market, which seems to have handed
But the,
the
the
market
point,
over
the,
to criminal
yeah,
gangs.
the point is there is no legitimate market. They destroy, these types of policies destroy the opportunities for legitimate brands to supply a legitimate product that is made according to standards and safety and health, etc. A legitimate product that will have the right amounts or what it says on the label, let's say.
Mm.
The alternative, because of the gap, is that the consumers, those people who they're still going to want the product, they'll go down the criminal route. They'll be supplied with a counterfeit, fake or substandard item. No idea what's in the chemicals, no idea what toxins, no idea of levels of chemicals inside, no idea of the safety standards of any of the batteries, which in themselves present health and safety issues, and in the end, probably no idea of the impacts on their own health and safety because of that. So
Yeah.
it's clear by taking away the opportunities for legitimate, the consumer is going into the unknown and going into the hands of the criminal who doesn't care at all about what it is that they're supplying because they're simply driven by the need for illicit gains. So if somebody dies from this, or if batteries explode, or somebody collapses because of a reaction to the toxins and the chemicals that are inside, they don't care. They walk away anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
then
think
the government is then left picking up the bill for looking after that person. So it's a no-brainer. It doesn't work.
yeah, on massive reduced taxation revenues as well, which I think is
And
happening
the impact,
elsewhere.
as I said earlier, and then of course the impact on the tax. Those countries that have identified a balanced approach, bringing in other regulations, bringing, like you said, some licensing, um, not outright bans, will try and find their way through this.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Brazil because Brazil, I've been reading up about Brazil recently. I apologize for my cat. I can't keep her away. She loves these Zoom things. Um, uh, I've read some recent press observations about the ongoing prohibition of harm reduction products in Brazil. The country banned vaping, I think, like I said, since 2009. Um, And I read an article that said, and I quote, Brazil is one of the world's largest cigarette markets. According to the latest KPMG data, roughly one third of cigarette consumption in Brazil is illicit, and this trade is firmly in the hands of organized criminal networks. Now, drugs cartels are widely cited as playing a central role in control of these illicit supply chains. Um, and that's going to continue, isn't it? As all the while that Brazil has a ban on these products.
Why would it stop?
Yeah.
Why would it not continue? If they're going to ban it, then the criminals are simply going to profit from that.
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen in other countries like Mexico where I spoke to a woman from Mexico last year, and she was quite terrifying, really, saying how the drug cartels are basically in charge of the operations over there, and it's some really scary things happening. Another quote that came from an article I read about Brazil is what's particularly striking is that after years of decline, smoking prevalence in Brazil has recently started to rise again. So we must ask if consumption is growing while regulation tightens, who is capturing that growth? The evidence increasingly points to criminal organizations expanding their market share, not governments strengthening control.
Exactly.
Mm. So, do you think maybe that with Argentina coming out with this new withdrawal of their bans on these products, do you think that could have some sort of effect on Brazil? Maybe they would be seeing the same reduction in their revenues and the same problems with illicit markets. Do you think maybe Argentina could impact Brazil? I mean, maybe lead Latin America?
What occurred to me is that Argentina or then can then become another source country for the illicit market. So you'll find criminals from Brazil maybe, or a lot of the sort of domestic smuggling people will go over there to try and source their products and then bring it back over for resale. So that's one potential outcome. Um, the cross-border flow of um, vaping and vape products is immense. I think I often talk about it as being the most prevalent illicit product of the day. And I don't say that lightly in a world of counterfeiting. In the world that I've lived in counterfeiting, of counterfeit alcohol, counterfeit food, clothing, luxury goods, counterfeit car parts. Um, to say that I think vapes are one of the most lucrative illicit products of the day means a lot. Means a lot for the criminals, because there is this huge demand for the product, a product which is um, quite easy to get through borders using their well tried and tested supply routes. So long as that demand remains, um, which unfortunately has been which it is because of government policy. It's such a lucrative market for criminals that it's no wonder that these huge, again in Mexico, this huge explosion of violence is accompanying some of these government policy decisions. But what I'd like to share with you is what does that mean in reality? What does that mean for um, the shopkeeper, let's say, for example? So, in my experience, I've seen this firsthand. Um, a shopkeeper, a mum and pop sort of independent store, informal store, will suddenly find himself confronted by two or three thugs who will come into the shop, maybe point a shotgun present a gun into this guy, into the owner's face, and say to him, from now on, you need to sell these products. And they will give him a box of illicit products that needs to be sold within a month. And they will come back in a month's time to get their money. And if you don't sell that, then there will be a threat of violence against him and against his family. Now, this is just a guy, a traitor. This is imagine this is a guy who's trying to make a living from a corner shop. Now the customer comes in and he has to try and direct them towards the illicit product. If he has got some genuine products, he's actually forcing them or trying to get them to buy the illicit product because he knows that he's under threat by these gangs in real time, in real life, which is, and I've seen that happening in different parts of the world. So that's the reality of the types of threats that the shopkeeper is going to face. The flip side of that, I've seen cases of customs officers, very effective customs officers who, in one particular country, had been very successful in seizing containers of illicit tobacco products and received a phone call. He received phone calls at home, was told to stop, was told to back off. He didn't. He answered a knock at the door one evening and was murdered on his doorstep by the gangs, by the criminals. That's the power that they have. That's the impunity that they work with. That is the violence that they will offer to protect their interests. They will threaten violence against the shopkeepers and threaten violence against law enforcement because such is the profits. They don't care, and that's the reality. That's the reality of what countries could face if these prohibition banning policies are allowed to continue. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I think many politicians think just by signing a law to say something's banned that the problem just goes away. But as you mentioned, anything that has a demand, a product that has a demand which needs to be met, will be met some way.
Well, the
And
truth is that I mean you're absolutely, you're 100% right. The politicians of the world make these types of policy decisions and then step back because said, well, that's now a problem for the police to deal with. That's now an enforcement problem. It's no longer our problem. This is now an enforcement problem, and they ditch it over to what is already, a stretched law, a globally stretched law enforcement environment who are having to deal with so many different types of crimes that never. When I was a young Bobby, these cyber crimes and sextortion and the extent of human trafficking and movement of people never existed. And there's this growth of different types of crimes. And add on to that now, we have to start policing this explosion in vapes, in illicit vapes to the mix. And if I could add, and I find this very interesting now. So before, when we spoke about when we spoke about illicit vapes, we might have been speaking about products coming from the many thousands of factories in certain parts of the world which are appearing, freely exported across borders. But now there's a marked explosion in domestic home production, and what I see now, my experience now in different parts of the world are individuals working in small basement rooms where they collect the component parts themselves. They create the oils and the liquids themselves, and they construct the product which they then put out into the streets. This domestic, call it domestic production, no longer huge, no longer factory produced, but domestically produced illicit vapes. And what you have there again now is a huge health and safety implication. Again, no idea what's inside, no idea what the contents are, no idea of the toxicity, no idea of the chemicals, no idea of the health and safety impacts of what it is, where it's made, the hygiene, no controls whatsoever, and so much easier for the bad guys because they're not having to try and risk import export. because they're domestically producing themselves in the country. Again, that presents huge enforcement challenges because you have this explosion of homemade illicit products.
Yeah, yeah. Um, could you just explain to me, because you mentioned earlier about I know you talked there about domestically made products, but you talked about getting things in from other countries. Now, I read somewhere that some of the docks in the UK receive up to like 100,000, 200,000 containers a day.
Yeah.
Um, and you're saying politicians, and I've seen this myself in the Tobacco and Vapes Act, they said that no, it's fine, we won't have an illicit market because we're just going to throw some money at enforcement and then enforcement will take care of that. What's the process at the ports? How do these things get in? Because I
You
have
know,
read that
the
if you're
truth,
smuggling,
yeah, the truth, as you know, and you're quite right. The truth is that you imagine these huge containers that arrive now with these container ships now with the thousands of containers on board. Without the best will in the world, there's no possibility to open and inspect all of those containers. So customs around the world have a very robust risk analysis based on data, which they use. This is well known. There's no secrets. They use the bills of lading that they search for. They search their databases to try and highlight potentially suspect containers, which are the ones they pull off to inspect. But the truth is that such is the volume that the organized crime gangs, they don't care if they lose a container, two containers, it doesn't matter to them because they'll have another 10 on the ship. It means nothing to them to lose some containers, and they'll put that down to experience. I know, there's a huge part played by free trade zones around the world where containers go into free trade zones, and the free trade zone is very much unregulated, non-transparent, let's say. So containers will go into a free trade zone, they'll come back out, the product will be moved into another container, seal numbers will be changed, bills of lading will be changed. The commodity that was in the container is now in another container, goes off into a different country, disappears, never to be seen again. In some parts of the world, the ports are in the hands of the organized crime. The port is controlled by the organized criminals. Of course, there are police and there are customs, and there'll be port authorities, but the handlers, the logistics, the management are all in the pay of organized crime gangs, and they will be asked to monitor and check and keep an eye on certain containers. And if and again, this is from personal experience, if there is any hint of law enforcement attention, the container is moved to the side and it's left. It's just abandoned there, and it will sit there for months. The police will be maybe doing some surveillance. It's not going to move because they've spotted it, and so that, imagine the whole system is in the hands of the criminals. And then the next thing that you should also consider is the incredible smuggling techniques that are used by the bad guys. So again, in my personal experience, a hollowed out petrol tanker. So imagine you've got a full size petrol tanker. It will have an inner skin and an outer skin. There'll be a little bit of petrol in the outer skin. If somebody did a dip, it will show there's petrol. If someone turned the valve, a little bit of petrol will come out. But in essence, the whole thing is empty. The whole thing is a void, and it's full of illicit products. And these containers, these petrol tankers are moving around, supposedly supplying petrol, but they're just they're packed with illicit products. One of the best ones I saw was some construction pillars of a bridge, a whole 30-foot span concrete bridge. the inside of which, the cement, the inside of which was hollowed and full of illicit products. You can go from that to drones. So simply using drones in Eastern Europe, that there are these hundreds of drones with illicit tobacco products going over the borders like this. Just madness.
Was it Belarus recently where they found people were importing cigarettes with helium balloons? I seem to
Exactly
remember.
that. Yeah, just hope the wind's blowing the right way.
Yeah, that's right.
No,
So
it's
we've
it,
got
it, it, and again, I mean, I laugh, but it just shows you know, the 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 profits that are available. You know, if I sat back and thought, well, if this was Class A drugs, if this was heroin or but these are tobacco products that are being smuggled in the same way. It just
Mhm.
shows you the profitability is there or even higher, and the risk of being caught is lower. And if you are caught, you're not dealing in a Class A drug. The penalties are a lot less.
Yeah. We've had a question for Nuance. Can you explain how funds flow from the sale of illicit products toward organised crime? Have you got any stories about that? I mean, we talk about
Yeah. Okay.
illicit crime, but
So
where do the
let,
funds go?
let, let's take a very simple example. In some countries, um, the informal trade. What I mean by informal trade is the mum and pup shops, the corner shops, the corner stores. I think everybody hopefully recognise what I mean. So, in some countries, these mum and pup shops and stores are typically run by the same ethnic groups. Without me mentioning, I'm not here to identify individual countries, but you'll have the same ethnic groups running hundreds of corner shops around the country. We have them in the UK. You probably know exactly who I mean.
Mm.
So these shops will be part of an ethnic group, and that ethnic group will report to an ethnic group gang master for whatever region or whatever city, and he will go around. Like I said, he will have already supplied them with illicit products that they need to sell, and he will go around and collect those funds. Those funds then there's two or three things that can happen. One is they're kept in cash and they're smuggled as bulk cash back to mainland Europe and across to wherever. Another way which I've witnessed myself is simply individual goes around, collects the cash, and goes to Western Union that night with a big wad of cash. Will go to Western Union and will make a transfer to his home country, and that's disappeared. That's gone. Simple as that. Simple as that. The more complex crime groups will use cryptocurrencies, try to make the funds untraceable through crypto. Um, other groups will try and swap profits from one illicit product into another illicit product. So the trade-offs are between the funds for this going into, as I said, into any other type of Class A drugs or um, um, firearms, or to fund subversive groups, whatever it is.
Okay, I just want to ask a question about because I think many people think this is something that's not gonna sort of affect their life anyway. But in Mexico, for example, we've seen reports about formerly legal retailers who are unwilling to risk prison sentences because of the new laws and they're shutting up shop. But some have been like forced to comply with the ban or and lose their livelihoods or engaging with the criminal networks. And we've also heard that there are reports of intimidation of customers. Is that something that is a regular thing? Do customers also get intimidated in this way by these gangs?
Well, this is, if what you described there is exactly what I said earlier about the guy going in the shop with a shotgun and saying to them, "You're going to sell my product for me." So that, that's a common theme in Mexico. Is exactly what was my experience in these other countries as well. So it comes to me as no surprise that that's what happens. I'm interested in you just a throwaway comment. You said, "Oh, it's not going to affect me. What this illicit market's not going to affect me."
Mm.
But consider this and this is very close to home for us in
Mm.
the UK. Consider that young girls are being enticed into providing sexual favors in
Mm.
order to get access to vapes. Young children
Yeah.
are being enticed to provide sexual favors to get access to illicit vapes.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, in the UK, there's quite a big story about gangs of people who are doing exactly that. They're preying on young girls, and the
Exactly.
government has ignored this for a long, long time until recently they were forced. They had to address it in some way, but they really
Yeah.
would prefer not to. But yeah, exactly. This is something where criminal networks are using that for things other
And the
than
re
just
and what worries me when you hear stories like that is in, that it gives an indication of the impunity, the fearlessness. I'm not worried. I'm not going to get caught. You know, the there's no because of there's no the lack of enforcement in this area globally. There's no fear. There's no fear. These bad actors, they think they can do these types of things without getting caught.
Mm.
And if you look at the journey of vapes, let's go back a bit. Let's go right from the beginning. So vapes are, you will know better than me. Vapes are introduced on the market as an alternative to heated product.
Mm.
And for all the best intentions in the world, the industry produced an alternative to heated tobacco. And very quickly that gets adopted by criminals who think, oh, here's a new product, so let's see how we can exploit that. And they then start their infiltration into the illicit market, into providing counterfeit products. We then move from that to, we hear that these products are now so much in demand, the market is so unregulated, and the enforcement is so poor that they're being used to entice, they're being used as payment for young people, for example. They're being used to entice favors or being used as a method of payment, etc., etc. And then take that now to another level where we now hear that vapes are being supplied with fentanyl, with cannabis, with opioids, with Chinese made spice, etc. Because the market is lost, the control is lost, and now the enforcement community and governments have to fight, have to come back from a really poor position. Instead of having been on top of it earlier on, we're now having to come from there down, which is horrendous. So the market is lost. The market is lost. When I heard about the controlled drugs being supplied in vapes, that for me was a big indication of how the organized crime gangs have the confidence to operate like that without fear. And I think we enforcement community has a big challenge ahead.
Yeah, I think the government in the UK has said that they would give trading standards 30 million to cover it. That's not that's a drop in the ocean, isn't it? Basically.
It's a start, but it it's again, it's not. How do I explain this? It's not about one country. Illicit trade generally doesn't belong to. Illicit trade is by its nature it is global. So you can do all the work in all you want in one country, and it will just come in from a neighboring country anyway. You could do all your work in protecting your port here, and it will come in at the port over there. So unless there's a shared responsibility to combat illicit trade in all its formats, in all its shapes and formats, again across all products, you will always lose. You will always lose to the criminals.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of work, as we haven't talked about consumers. You know, a lot of work trying to educate the consumer. Bill and Ben in the street to say, make an informed choice what you do with your money. You know, you've got a chance, you've got a choice here now. You're after whatever the product is. Make an informed choice what you want to do with those funds. Do you want to give it to the guy that's going to now hand it to the human traffickers so that we get another 6 or 7 boats come across, or to the guy that's going to supply drugs, which will now come onto the same street corners, or do you want to save that money and try and give it to the legitimate business? Make an informed choice, but we lose because Bill and Ben will always go for the cheap option. Bill and Ben doesn't care as long as he's got a cheap product. He doesn't care where it comes from. He doesn't care where the money goes. He even doesn't care whether it, you said in your opening comments in your survey, 35 to 39% of e-cigarettes users said they would use illicit channels to acquire product. So just a shy under half of those surveyed said, I'm quite happy just a shy of half of those people said, I'm quite happy giving my money to criminals, and I don't care that they're going to buy guns or buy drugs or exploit people or traffic people. I don't care about that because I'm Bill and Ben and I want my cheap product.
Yeah. They see it as a victimist crime, don't they, a lot of the time? Yeah,
Unfortunately,
exactly.
they're
Yeah.
far removed, and I've been at the other end of that where I've seen the real impacts. I've seen people who've been trafficked. I've seen people who are in forced labor. I've seen people who are in slavery, who are under the control of gangs who are being exploited, making illicit products for Bill and Ben to buy because they don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talking of which, I mean, we've got a question here. What, if any, success stories do we have of regulators coming to understand the bad effects of overregulation or prohibitionism and reversing course? These days, it seems difficult to use this messaging to break through anti-nicotine biases. How do we more effectively communicate and advocate reform? Now, what you're saying there is that the victims at the end of the day can often be the consumers. So this becomes a public protection issue from governments. So rather than regulating these, they should be thinking of, rather than prohibiting these things, they should be thinking of regulating on a public safety
My point, right?
basis.
That's my opening comments. Instead of an outright ban, is if you have a balanced approach, this balanced regulation or licensing or controls, at least you have some insights on what is going on. At least you, as a government or as a policymaker, have some insight as what is going on. If you have a ban, you drive it underground and you have no insight of what is happening. No insight. But I'm just looking here at my list. There are some good stories. Sweden is an example, regularly quoted. Japan is an example. New Zealand is an example where they have found this balanced. If that's what the question was related. Examples of where it has worked. I think those may be some there. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you think there are some countries whose the people in charge just don't care? I mean, they just want these products banned and they really don't care much for the consequences.
No. Again, I'll go back to my thoughts. I'll go back to my original comments around when they open, when if the governments are transparent and they are open for discussion and they're open for opinion, searching for opinions, searching for guidance, invariably that guidance comes from like I said, researchers or academics or stakeholders with whatever interests, but very rarely does it come from people like me, from from the dark side, and if it does come from people like me, they sometimes think you're making these stories up. I've heard people say, well, that can't be true. It can't be true that young girls are being exploited by by payments, and then, as you know, we have these case examples across the UK, not just once, but in many, many parts of the UK. And if it's happening here, it's happening everywhere. So I don't think they're just turning a blind eye. It's just whether they really, and this is a problem that I've faced for most of my time at Interpol. It's convincing policymakers of the real impact of illicit trade, the personal impact of illicit products. Illicit products do nothing but harm. They will be substandard. They will be dangerous. They will kill people. They will harm. They will maim, and they provide huge revenues going in the wrong direction for the wrong people, for bad guys to do bad things. And Bill and Ben doesn't care. Bill and Ben doesn't care because he's getting a cheap product.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I, I want to try and finish on something upbeat, but I can only think of negatives at the moment. Um, for example, in the UK specifically, we had a ban on disposable vapes. It always seemed strange to me that we were worried about illicit trade, and yet we were banning the legal trade, and everything has just gone dark. And there are countries like that, but um, we'll try something positive. What advice would you have to policymakers when they're weighing up these subjects, and who should they be listening to? Because it seems that many of them aren't listening to people like you. They're not listening to experts in illicit trade. In fact, many times they say illicit trade is a myth. It's a
That's
tobacco
the problem.
industry.
Yeah,
A tobacco industry ruse. It's a tobacco industry talking point. Who should they be listening to, and
yeah.
why?
I think I'd love the opportunity to encourage greater engagement with chiefs of police, chiefs of customs. In the UK, as you mentioned, we have the trading standards. Many other countries have market inspectors and market observers, who who see the harm and see the reality of what is happening. If a particular illicit product, such as vapes, such a product that is in demand, is allowed to become unregulated and out of control, to have some to receive some advice of what that potentially could lead to, what that means in reality for your communities and for your societies. um, and listen.
I think that's great advice. So thanks very much for that, Michael. It's been great talking to you. Some of the things you've told me are quite shocking, and even someone who's been talking about this subject for, well, 17, 18 years, I think. It's quite astonishing to hear that. So thanks very much for giving us your
I
advice.
appreciate the
Um,
chance.
yeah. And everyone else, thanks very much for attending. If you attended live or if you're watching afterwards, I hope you can give us any questions that you may have. Send them to to a TPA address which you would have if you registered for this event. Um, and please follow the Taxpayers Protection Alliance on social media. It's at Protect Taxpayers on X. We're on Facebook, Instagram, I think. I'm not an Instagram user, but do try and get involved. And thanks for joining us, Michael. And we wish you all the best in your future
Appreciate
endeavours
it.
with Prohibition Does Not Work and others. So thanks for attending, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.